we can stop and have more time for longer questions if you have them. All right, so I'm with the North Carolina Forest Service. There's the State Forest Service as well as the U.S. Forest Service. So they deal with all federal lands. So PSGA is all of them. We'll assist each other on fires if they're right there kind of on the boundary of each ownership. But I deal with private land here in the county. So I work a lot with residents who live in the county and have forest land. I work some with urban forestry, but that's pretty strong already in the county. So typically I'm on private lands. Now, as far as my duties, I'm lucky to be involved with a broad spectrum of different forestry topics. The main one, when it's fire season, being fire. Myself and Tony, he's the smoke chaser for the county. We are the initial attack response, in addition to the fire departments for any brush fires in the county. So that's what we're listening out for all the time. But in the meantime, like I said, a lot of what I do is forest management. So I'll go out and help folks manage their forest based on whatever objectives they may have, whether that's harvesting timber, managing for wildlife, etc. And then we also monitor logging jobs for water quality. We'll go out and do events like this. So all that to say that I'm kind of all over the place with the different things that I do. But when it's fire season, that's kind of my main priority. Like I said, work with fire departments, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't pay them a little tribute here, because they help us out greatly. Like I said, there's 2 people who work across the entire Henderson County other than DuPont, and so we couldn't put out the fires that we do if it weren't for the fire departments. So if y'all are involved in fire departments or know people who are, don't forget to thank them. But a lot of what we're talking about is how the residents of the county play a role in our wildfire suppression, and especially if you're involved with any kind of landscaping or really any kind of natural resource management. So what I have here, this is what I ride around in. It's basically an F-350 with a 150-gallon tank on the back. So that's not a lot of water. It lasts a couple minutes. So we really rely on a lot of help from a lot of people to do what we do. So I'll kind of get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is getting us to think about ourselves in the broader ecosystem, because I'm sure a lot of us live here because we love being in and around the forest. And what a lot of us focus on are the beauty of the forest, the trees, the clean water, and the weather we have around here. But our area is naturally adapted to frequent fires. And so that's why it's so important for people to understand what it's going to be like when fires do come through, because we all remember 2016, which was one of the worst fire seasons we've had around here. And the predictions that are coming out are hotter and drier weather, swinging back to very wet, prolonged weather, and that's what we're seeing already. So this map here shows different ecosystems around the country, us obviously being right in here. And basically what I'm trying to paint here is, and this is hard to see, but basically what this says is understory fires in the light blue every 0 to 10 years, and the dark blue 0 to 34. So all this to say that our ecosystem is supposed to have regular fires run through it every few years, and so we kind of need to be ready for that, because these woods are naturally supposed to burn. And I'll get into a little bit more of that. Now here in western North Carolina, our fire seasons are spring and fall. We're kind of just getting into it now. In fact, I don't know if you heard my pager, but Buncombe County is responding to something right now. We had little stuff pop up here and there, and it's only been, less than a week since the last rain. So things dry out quickly, and we start seeing fires not long after the sun comes out around here, especially in spring and fall. Now, fires do happen in the other seasons. Summer, by the time we green up, we're lucky to live in a pretty wet environment, and by the time all the leaves are out, we don't see a whole lot unless we dry out and get into a decent drought. And then in winter, they'll definitely happen, but once it gets cold, and especially if it starts snowing, there's not going to be a whole lot. So this, it looks a little scary because it's at night, but this is actually, I believe this one's from Polk County, and this is the type of fire that's natural for our community. Again, it looks a little more intense because it's at night, but even these biggest flame lengths here are probably about maybe 2.5 feet at the most. And so this kind of low intensity fire runs through, consumes the fuels that are on the floor, the forest floor, and helps to regenerate these fire adapted species that we have. Now, when these fires are suppressed, what that leads to is a buildup of fuel, because these fires are kept from running through every few years. And that's when, luckily we haven't had this, but that's why, especially in California or Colorado or the Pacific Northwest, they'll have these big crown fires that pretty much nuke everything that's out there, and that's not going to help perpetuate a healthy forest, at least not here. So I know this is too small for anyone to read. I can barely read it, but but these are some stats from 2016. That was our last big fire season, and this wasn't even at the very end of it. This was around Thanksgiving of 2016, and there were 25 significant fires since the end of October. Now, typically, a significant fire for certain rating systems is 100 acres and above, which is kind of the high end of what we even have around here. Our fires are typically on the order of a couple to maybe 10, 15 acres, depending on where they are. 11 were still active when this came out. We had teams from across the country and even outside the country working on our fires here in Henderson County, Buncombe County, especially up at Party Rock. Just millions of dollars of cost from these fires. One thing to look at here is that only a few structures were actually destroyed. One was in Henderson County, and it was only an outbuilding. So really the only reason that that's the case is because of the fire departments that we have. But we rely on homeowners being aware of the potential for these fires and taking some matters into their own hands. And so that's kind of what we're going to get into here. Again, this is just a recent paper that I read that actually, around here, there's not much old growth. And so there's actually been a study that just came out that they reconstructed a lot of the forests around here and showed that they were even more fire adapted than was previously thought. And as far as being concerned with specific species and plants, I know these aren't garden plants, but oak, pine, and hickory are said to have been 85% of what was in this forest. Any questions on kind of that part of things before we jump into fighting fire and how fire behaves? All right. Either means I'm doing a good job or everyone's asleep already. All right, so the three main influences on fire behavior are topography, fuels, and weather. Most of what we're going to hit on today is going to be fuels because, we think of plants, you don't really think of them as fuel for a fire, but when you're a wildland firefighter, that's how you see it when it gets to springtime or the fall. But topography, the main thing to remember, it's kind of intuitive, but fire will typically run uphill and it'll be more intense with steeper slopes. And we've got those all over the place around here. I mean, you get off 191 or 280 just a little bit and my truck barely makes it up those hills sometimes. So. And then fuels, plenty of those. We live in a really great place for forestry and for gardening because, at least for forestry, what we're trying to do is decide what grows because something's going to grow everywhere pretty much all the time. And then weather. Lately, hasn't exactly been fire weather, but it can change quickly, and we'll talk about how quick changes in weather can affect fuels and affect fire. So I think it's important for people to understand what we're doing when we show up to fight a fire, whether there's any homes around or not. This is a picture. I believe this is Polk County. I think most of these are from a fire a couple of years ago in Polk County. But this is typically what it's going to look like when we show up to fight a fire. People think fighting fire, just use water, put it out. Everyone knows that. That's great for structural fires because you have fire departments with these hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water on their tankers that come out and these giant hoses. But the hose on my truck is 1.5 inches and there's only 150 gallons. So I could maybe protect that corner. But as far as actually putting out a structure that's on fire, it's not going to happen. And most of what we do is try and remove the fuel so that the fire doesn't have anything to consume, and basically we draw a line around it to try and stop that fire. So that's what's going on here. This is a fire line. It's hard to believe that that can stop a fire, but it can. It won't always, but it can. And so typically when we show up, we're grabbing rakes and leaf blowers and a drip torch, which I'll get into here in just a sec. But basically without water, we can't control the oxygen, we can't control the heat, but we can't control the fuel. And again, we said fuels are the plants, and it's a lot easier for us if these fuels have been taken into consideration before we ever got there. So this picture is a little bit hard to see. So I talked before about how fire tends to run uphill. It's a little hard to tell a difference in color, but this is actually what's burned already, and the fire is moving this way. And that's actually because we set that fire. The wildfire around it, we didn't set, but our strategy, again, is to consume the fuel so that the fire doesn't have anything to burn. And a lot of times for us, what that means is burning it ourselves in as controlled of a manner as we can, so that by the time the fire reaches anywhere near this house, all the fuel is already consumed and it doesn't have a way to travel closer to the house. So these terms here, not that important for you to know exactly what they mean, but basically direct attack is what we would like to do if we can. If I show up and there's a fire engine there, I'm going to have them pull a hose and just try and knock that fire out right there, nice and quick. But a lot of times, like I said, there's only one of me, and the fire departments are definitely busy in this county. So it could be that by the time we get there, it's off in some steep drainage that we're not going to be able to catch it in. So kind of our bread and butter when it gets into that situation is what's called indirect attack. And we'll find a safe place that we can get to start that backfire and try and meet up with the wildfire. So I like people to be aware of that because people think that we'll just come and they'll be here in a minute and they'll just put some water on it, but typically it's going to involve putting more fire on the ground, and we're not going to do that if putting fire on the ground near someone's house is going to compromise it, of course. Alright, so getting into the fuels and the differences between them. The main fuel that we deal with and that we try and have homeowners and residents consider are these fine fuels. Here we have hardwood forest, typically it's leaves or pine needles, small twigs. Basically, these are what carry the fire. These are the receptive fuels. If an ember lands on it, you can pretty much bet it's going to catch. Now these numbers here, these time lags, these have to do with how long it takes for both consumption of the fuel and how long it takes to respond to its environment. And that's the other reason why these are really important to remember, because these are the fuels that are dried out already from just a few days of sunny and a little bit windy weather that we've had. Now these are still important to remember, these bigger fuels, the branches and limbs and logs, because if they do catch, they might take 100 hours of burning and smoldering to really consume, and a lot of times you can't see that happening. This is probably the main thing that we try and get homeowners to wrap their heads around, and it's not a difficult concept, but this is what we're talking about when we talk about Firewise landscaping and being Firewise around your home. So if these green dots are fuels, we're looking at breaking up the continuity of the fuels between the forest and the home or the structure. And I'll have pictures of that later on. But basically what that's saying is that if all this is, a few shrubs here and there and, a few trees, there's going to be leaf litter all the way through all of this. And like we said, that's what carries fire. So if this is what leads up to your home, a fire is going to run through that and get to your home maybe before even we will. Whereas something like this, that fire's got a hopscotch between all these, and it's going to lose its intensity pretty quick. Now, that's horizontal. The vertical arrangement is a similar concept. Now, like we saw in that picture of that low intensity fire, they typically burn in that leaf litter layer. And so that ground fire, as it's moving, the question is, does it have a ladder to climb from the ground to these tree canopies or taller fuels? And a lot of times what we see is that there's this leaf layer, and then there might be some laurel or rhododendron just above it, and that fire can heat that up, and they heat up pretty quickly and dry it out, and that'll catch, and then that'll keep climbing up into the tree canopy, which is how we get the crown fires, but that's also what can shoot those embers onto a roof or into a gutter, which a lot of times is what catches a home on fire. I know I'm going pretty quick, but if there's a burning question, you can stop me, but I'll try and stop after. Didn't even need to. All right. So talking about the fuels themselves, I'm not going to pretend like I'm a master gardener myself. Most of what I deal with as far as plants is a forest ecosystem. We do some help with urban forestry, but most of what I do involves an intact forest. So I don't deal with ornamentals very much. We do deal with some invasives, but this is kind of the big no-no species for wildland firefighters. Rhododendron and mountain laurel, basically anything with that thick waxy leaf, the oils and resins in those will burn like crazy. It's kind of like pine resin if you burn pine needles and they catch and flare up. Now, due to past management and a host of other things, there's a lot of rhododendron and laurel in our forests and in our communities, and they're beautiful plants. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to cut and go kill every single one, but it's something to think about because a lot of people haven't been told that they're not Firewise at all, and that it really is dangerous to have these encroaching on your house. I'll get into a little more of that here when we actually get into the landscaping part of things. And the other thing to consider is water capacity. These herbaceous, fleshy plants that that need a lot of water are going to obviously take longer to dry out and typically hang around when it's wet, rather than if you've got all these plants in your yard and in your community that are adapted to very dry conditions. They're more susceptible to catching on fire. And this is kind of bringing some of this stuff together. Heat transfer, going back to high school science. We've got convection, radiation, and conduction. This convection, that's why fires tend to run up slope, because they heat up what's above them, like a convection oven. It heats up the air, and that moves through and heats up whatever's above it. So that's where that vertical arrangement comes in, where if there's ever a fire, it's preheating anything above it. And if a fire gets into this stage or gets higher, that convective air is going to keep those embers shooting up like this and falling on whatever house is nearby. Radiation, just showing that if there's a fire, it is still heating in all directions. And then a lot of people, we'll see in a second, people will have these fuels right up next to their house, whether it's plants or firewood, or they haven't blown out the leaves near their house. And that's just bringing in all three forms of heat transfer. this is a home here in this area in Henderson County, and looking at it, to me that looks pretty nice, but the other side of me, who fights fire, is wanting to scream at these people. But, you know, this is kind of showing what we just said. You've got these rhododendron right here, these, you know, very hot burning fuels right up next to a home. And again, it looks kind of nice. It makes you feel like you're in the woods maybe, but when the woods are on fire, you don't really want to feel like you're right in the woods. And, you know, the other thing was behind here. Yep. All those things. Y'all are ahead of me. So back here, this is all hardwoods and the forest beyond. So there's already that entire leaf layer that's supposed to burn. It looks like this is south facing based on where the sun is. So this slope is heating up all day. If that fire gets into that leaf litter, it's going to run uphill because that's a downhill slope there. And then you've got all this horizontal continuity where that fire can just run right up through there as these fuels are heating up.
So what would you advise the homeowner to do?
In this situation, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the next section of it, but just look at breaking up that continuity. And sometimes that's taking out some plants, sometimes that's limbing them up to allow for example, back here, limbing up some of the trees to allow that fire to move underneath if it's going to be coming up towards the house without catching the tree on fire. And then some different options as far as mulching around here and just landscaping in general. But in this situation, I'd recommend some pretty significant changes to the landscaping here. Now, what I'm here trying to talk about today is the ideal situation, and I know that there's going to be some people who go home today and look out their back door and see a sea of rhododendron and then turn around and go back inside. And that's fine. It's your property and you do whatever you like to with it. You know, I understand that part of gardening is being creative and not just doing a cookie cutter design or whatever in your landscape. But what I'm trying to do is just make sure that people understand the principles and then they do whatever they like or don't like with it. But we'll get into more of the do's and don'ts here in a little bit. I see this all the time. It sounds a little dramatic, but really, you know, by the time we make it to a community, this may be a house that we pass by because it's already involved and there's not a whole lot of chance of saving it if this is already on fire. You know, when we go in there, if we can use water, which most of the time we do have fire departments, and so there's some water available. You know, even if the fire is not here, for structure protection, what they'll do a lot of times is set up a hose lay around that house. So they'll pull hose and have several nozzles to either wet the fuels in front of the house or put foam out, or if the fire's close enough and small enough to fight directly, they can just attack it like that. But me, if I'm in charge of anyone on a hose, I'm not going to send them trying to fight through this and pull a hose through there, because then they're surrounded by fuels, and I'd rather a home get damaged than a person. And the other thing with rhododendron is that it tends to grow like crazy, so trimming them back is not going to typically kill them. And again, I'm not the gardener in this situation, but as far as forestry, it's causing some problems in forestry as well, and there's not much we can do to really get rid of it. So I wouldn't worry about trimming back some rhododendron. It'll keep on sprouting typically, and I won't get too much into that side of things, but you know, like I said, here in Western North Carolina, it's not about will something grow, it's deciding what you want to have growing. And so kind of being able to look at it from a different perspective may or may not change your mind on what you want out there. But these are just things to consider. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you have rhododendron in your yard, because I'm sure all of you would leave if I said that. So this is another image showing the spotting. Spotting is what we call the embers shooting out ahead of the fire or away from the fire and starting another fire. And this is typically how structure fires start from brush fires. It's most of the time, it isn't that the fire runs straight through a very dense, thick patch straight into a house, although that does happen too. All right, any questions on that part? Like I said, now we're kind of going to get into the gardening side of things and different options there. But any questions on how we fight fire, what resources that we have, anything about wildland fire?
So I have a hillside and I have a lot of pine bark mulch or hardwood mulch.
Mhm.
Is that something that's bad, good? I mean,
It depends on the arrangement of it, and I'll have a little slide on that here in a minute, but with mulch, it's basically looking at where it is in relation to your home. Mulch, it is a fuel and it will ignite. There are some mulches that are better than others. Typically the kind of shredded hardwood mulch is better than, say, what we really don't want to see is pine straw or any kind of grass. Of the flashy fuels, those typically are the quickest to burn and some of the hottest burning. And the other thing with that is whether it's invasive or not all invasive species will necessarily burn hotter, but the nature of invasive species is that they kind of take over, and a lot of these were introduced as ornamental species, which I'm sure y'all are familiar with. But for example, pampas grass or Chinese silvergrass, I mean, it's all over the place in the county, and I actually don't know exactly what it is in those plants, but I mean, they'll shoot, 20 to 40 foot flame lengths from grass. And in Madison County, they have a big problem with all that. And a lot of people burn it off because it gets so thick that they want to burn it each year. And with that kind of grass, and a lot of grasses, they're adapted to fire as well, so they just keep coming back. And so each year we do have fires from people being unaware and setting a hillside on fire. So kind of having this little bit of fire awareness and this idea of what we have in the county to fight wildfires, and knowing that fires should be happening ecologically, don't set fires, but they should be happening ecologically in our area. So now we can kind of start talking about how someone who doesn't wear a patch and drive around in a green truck can still be a really important part of this equation. So this is again from that fire in Polk County, and we've already got some factors limiting our response, but this isn't out of the question to happen. And a lot of communities around here have one road to get into them and one road to get out. So before we can get any of that equipment in here, there may be some unforeseen things to take care of. And so this is where having that preparedness ahead of time can save you, or save your home if we can't get there quite in time. This is another big problem that we have, is access. People really like to live out in the mountains, and sometimes that's the only place to live around here. The valleys are pretty full with water these days, but this is a community in our area, and my truck, like I said, it's basically a F-350 with a tank on the back. It would probably make it up this. I might have to do a little wiggling up here, but a brush truck with a fire department, they're kind of a step up from mine. And then especially a Type 1 engine, a regular fire truck, it's not going to make it up this. And so they may be able to pull hose up to that house, depending on what the rest of this looks like. But, landscaping goes farther than just the plants that are there. And, we're looking out for the safety of the firefighters too. So if the fire is encroaching and they're not going to be able to safely maneuver, that's not a situation that we want to put people in. Got a short video to kind of demonstrate some of this. I think it's important to sort of see what this stuff looks like, because if we have a bad fire season and there's a significant fire in a community, the first thing that happens is that we evacuate that community. And that needs to happen because it's a task enough to try and keep accountability on everyone who's actually working the fire, but to have, you know, homeowners, even really helpful homeowners, if you don't know exactly where they are on the fire, it's better to just not have them there, you know, even the most enthusiastic. But anyhow, all this to say that this is what you're trying to prepare your home for, because you probably won't be there to try and put it out with a hose or anything like that. So bear with me here. If some of this stuff is too quick to read, basically it's a demonstration of what it's like when a wildfire comes into the wildland-urban interface. And they're using very realistic fuels, you know, mulches and leaves and things that you would normally see for starting the fire and putting around the home. And keep in mind, this is only with having, what, 3 feet of fuels around the home. The rest is cement, so keep that in mind. And this might look like kind of dramatic and a lot of embers, but I mean, this is exactly what it'll be like in a wildland fire setting. Again, the embers are what carry the fire, and when we're in significant fire season, it could be that half the embers start their own fire. And look how quick this is happening.
That's not time lapse.
No, you saw that guy walking in the back?
I did.
Mm-hmm. Can't read that. It says that this is basically the Class A roof, which is the highest fire rated roof. I think they had a little bit of fuel in little corners like you would normally see.
What kind of gutters did you say those are?
I didn't see exactly what the gutters were. Fine. So I think that's the woodlap siding that it said, which was very flammable. You know, but the other damage in there, you know, especially in a lot of communities we have here, if a house escaped with what we saw in that last frame, that really isn't that bad, and it's still damaging. Fires, both structure fires and wildfires will kind of create their own wind patterns and their own weather, and they'll be very strong at the head of that fire. So, you know, even if the weather isn't a big factor that particular day, you know, if it's any kind of decent fire, it'll create its own weather and momentum. Okay, so again, you know, that really wasn't that intense of a fire as far as any of those little spot fires on that house, except for that one with the siding. And so that's what these ecosystems are designed to do, is have those fires, and that's what helps them regulate and keep those fuel loads down. Now with the Forest Service, we're trying to have more prescribed burns, where we go, and in fact we're trying to do that tomorrow up in Yancey County, where we'll go and we'll set a section of woods on fire, basically to do that, what the natural ecosystem would do itself. But it's relatively new in the mindset of the public, and so it's not something that we're running through communities at this point, and it's going to be a long time before that it gets to that point. And so, but we try to make people aware of that, at least know that these are fire adapted ecosystems, and that it's not crazy at all to have the same area burn this year and then burn again in 2 or 3 years. And although we had a wet year, what that does is it stimulates more growth, because typically the plant isn't limited by that resource of water, and so it'll put off more leaves and there will be more growth that year, which means more fuel the following year. Alright, so now we're getting into the actual Firewise program, and these are all across the country. There's a lot of this information online. Brought a little bit with me here. Most of it's on the construction side of things. There's a little brochure here. I think there may be enough for everyone on, you know, Firewise Home, but these are the things we're looking at, which we've already been talking about. This red line is called the immediate zone, the 0 to 5 foot zone around your home. And, you know, we saw what that can do. I mean, that's what that video had, these plants right along the sides and the mulch and things like that. Intermediate zone, 5 to 30 feet, and then extended zone, 30 to 100 feet. And keep in mind with these numbers, this is for flat ground, but these increase dramatically with slope on the downslope side. So, you know, for the intermediate zone, for example, on any kind of decent slope, instead of stopping at 30 feet, it's more like 100 feet. So, you know, everything gets pushed out when it's on a slope, and especially on southern aspects. But this is generally the idea that they try and convey in Firewise. You know, as few flammable materials in that immediate zone as possible. You can see they've got stone walkway. Inorganic mulches are great in this area, and getting on a gardener, I'm sure there's a lot of opinions on that. But as far as fire is concerned, a rock is not really a receptacle fuel. So that's kind of what we're looking for. In that intermediate zone, that's a big one for gardening and landscaping. But the key there is especially to break up that horizontal continuity, and you can see, you know, kind of what they're going for here are small groupings. Now, again, I understand that part of gardening and landscaping is having that creativity, but to me, you know, at least incorporating some of these elements, I think it doesn't sacrifice too much in terms of that. So the immediate zone, a lot of this is not so much, I mean, other than not having the fuels right there, it's more about maintenance, which does play into what you plant and how you plant and what your plans are down the road for your property, because you need to be able to maintain whatever it is that you plant. You know, if you're out there planting 10 trees this year and, you know, 6 more next year, and in 15 years, are you going to be able to really keep up with maintaining all that and blowing those leaves out and getting everything ready for the fire seasons? These are kind of the questions that we're looking to ask. But again, a lot of this is the actual infrastructure side of things. In that video, it showed the attic vent with the embers coming through, and that was even with the screen on it. But it's going to be a lot better to have a few of those small numbers come in than, clumps of leaves or whole leaves on fire that are going to burn a little longer and be more likely to catch something. Firewood piles, that's another big one. By the time it gets cold enough to where you need firewood, you don't really want to go far to go get more of it. But I mean, fire, it's in the name, it's supposed to burn, and so having that near your home, it's a risk. Okay, so that intermediate zone, you don't have to read all of this, but this is straight off the Firewise website. Things like propane tanks, I guess kind of a no-brainer in some ways, but just, as you're kind of designing and rethinking, different aesthetics around your home, building in some of these patios, walkways, basically they're fire breaks. And you can make them look nice. They don't have to be the fire breaks that we make, which are just scratched into soil. But thinking of these things for their utility in addition to their aesthetics is kind of what we're going for. Keeping your grass to 4 inches. I wouldn't get out there with a ruler, but just kind of, it's common sense sort of stuff. Now, if you've got any kind of that invasive grass, like I said, that stuff, it torches like you wouldn't believe. So that would be one thing that if you have any of that in your area, that's something that I would look at right away. And that stuff dries out really quick too, so it doesn't have to be fire season for that to get going. So this is a big one. It doesn't mean you have to remove everything, but limbing up shrubs and plants is great, or keeping them small. I was at a home up in Mills River a few months ago, and it looked great. They had stuff spaced out, and they still kept some rhododendron and some laurel. There was a big laurel that it was beautiful, and I see why he wanted to keep it. And he said, okay, maybe I'll take out this one, and maybe I'll trim this nice one back, but I do want to keep it. That's fine. But just having these concepts in mind, limbing up trees is great. I got a picture of that here in just a minute. And keeping these distance between crowns, and that's something to think about as soon as you're planting or deciding what you want to plant. They might be 18 feet away when you plant them, but by the time they're full-blown trees, those crowns are probably going to be pretty intertwined. And you have to consider the severity of your property. Is it a steep, south-facing, fully exposed area, or is it a area that stays pretty wet, maybe north-facing? Rhododendron naturally is going to be on those north-facing slopes, and that's fine. And those are the slopes that aren't going to catch as readily. However, when we do get dry enough for them to catch, they usually have the most fuel because it hasn't burned, or a lot can grow there. So, kind of keeping all these things in mind before it's fire season is the way to go. And the other thing too, a lot of folks around here don't have a lot of time to do this work. How many people are seasonal residents? Wow, look at that. I think that's probably the first group of people in Henderson County that there hasn't been a hand. But there's probably some in your communities. And we have a community in Laurel Park right now that's trying to get Firewise certified. And, that's one thing that they've run into. They're a small community, so, they can work around it. But if half the residents are seasonal, then, and your neighbor's one of them, then they're not going to be doing that work to help protect your home. So unfortunately it can fall on you, or at least the responsibility or the opportunity to talk with them about this stuff sometimes falls on the neighbor. And then that extended zone, this is especially if you are on a slope. It's not just a lawn to kind of think about. That fire is going to be coming in underneath whatever kind of cover you have down far from you downslope. And so it's not saying to go in and sweep the ground on the forest down below you, but if you got a big jackpot of logs or slash down below, that might be what does catch and throw those embers. All right, another visual for, again, the same principle. So this is, I think the rest of the presentation for the most part is pictures of places in the county. And this was an area that there was some work done in to make the community more Firewise. That's the house up there, and that's the deck, so there's all this space underneath it where that heating can go on and that convection can heat that deck. This was before, and that was after. And I mean, I love seeing this. And that's how thick it was all through there. And I mean, this, and this is right after the work, so it's not like it has to stay in that kind of aesthetic if that's not appealing. Yeah, to me, the Forest Service side of me is kicking my heels at that. And it might not be all that drastic. This one went from this to that. So, you've still got your laurel and your rhododendron, but it's backed up a few more feet and kind of taken into the consideration that intermediate zone there. Ask yourself, does your property look like that? They're going to have to look a lot farther out because they're at the top of this ridge. Ridges are drier anyway, and that fire is going to run up that slope. And how about all that? This is pretty common. I think a lot of these are little maple saplings that probably volunteered in there, but they're going to be putting leaves down. Can't tell what that is, but kind of looking at all these kind of hot spots of where we saw those fires catch in that video. This is a checklist. I know it's too small to read, but there are these resources on the Firewise website, and I can write that down somewhere. I think it's just firewise.org, or if you just search NC Firewise, there's some stuff that's specific to our area. This is excellent. Anyone know what kind of plants those are? No, but in all seriousness, this is exactly what we look for. And it, I think the 2 pictures down is the zoomed out. I don't think it's this next one, but right. So that's what we don't want. And this is especially dangerous because, like we said, these are the receptive fuels, and there may be a fire in the nearby area, and you might have thought, oh, that didn't get anywhere near me, I'm so lucky. Then you head out to go pick up Junior, and you come back and there was an ember sitting there, and the embers, even the small spark like you see off of a campfire, can sit in this for hours before it actually catches something. I guess that picture's later. So getting into that mulch, it's again using these principles of the different zones and the fuels. You got the inorganic, the stones here, shells, and then a little farther out you might use some of this, and again it's kind of a balance. Most people aren't going to have every single thing exactly perfect as far as Firewise is concerned, but it's maybe one of those trade-off things where, hey, I've installed this mesh underneath my deck, and I switched it to gravel. So yeah, I am going to have some mulch next to my house. But the other key term, which doesn't get said enough around here, it's really common out west, but it's the term called defensible space, and that's what we look for, is a home that we can get around and defend, or that a homeowner can defend. And this is exactly, I'll be happy to have people out there with a hose to protect that home, because they're pretty safe at that point, depending on the fire. So again, lots of great things, when we recommend tree planting in people's yards and in communities, we always tell them to mulch. There's a lot of beneficial aspects of it. It's just being aware of this other one. So this is that home that had the gravel underneath the deck. So I mean, they don't have grass completely around, and they don't even necessarily need to have all that grass to be Firewise. But this is great, and I mean they're setting themselves up to sleep well at night, even when we get into fire season. This again, it's a different aesthetic, but still using these principles. We got the rock around here. All of this is mulch, but I wouldn't really be all that worried about that. There's not much in terms of ladder fuels. They've got shrubs low to the ground. These are kind of in their own space. The thing to worry about here is, you've got this whole line of trees and that's dropping leaves, so it's just things like keeping your gutters cleaned out. Again, I know you can't read this one, but there is on that Firewise website, there is a chart here of the flammability of different mulches. The one thing I'll point out is the pine needles and different straws are up here in this high category. So that's really what we don't want. The shredded hardwood is here in the medium, so it's not perfect, but I'd be okay with that if it was my house.
What about shredded leaves? Would be up high. Shredded leaves?
Correct, shredded leaves, that's going to be one of our primary fine flashy fuels. It'd be pretty much the same as pine needles. So the other thing is kind of the maintenance. We've talked about most of this already. But if it is a time when things are getting pretty dry, of course be wise and courteous about water, but make sure your plants aren't just sitting there ready for an ember to land on them and ignite. Consider other than just the natural, power lines are one of the leading causes of fire in this area. Number one is debris burning, so that can be hard to predict. And personally, I don't want to leave, the safety of my home in the hands of just trusting that someone's going to be responsible with their brush pile. But power lines, with the ice we've had and the snow this past season, there's been some pretty significant damage in the area, and that's sometimes it'll happen, the next ridge over, where out in the middle of the woods a tree falls, knocks the power line down, and then it runs up to a community nearby. That's happened several times. So again, can you maintain the things that you plan to plant? Are you going to be able to limb them up and prune them? Are you going to have time to rake them and get the leaves removed before we get into that intense fall fire season again? Burning, this is what a lot of people choose to do to get rid of those trimmings, and that's fine as long as you're smart about it. There's a burn permit that you can get online through the Forest Service, or you can come to my office. Get one here too. There's lots of agents around the county. The fire departments have them. A few of the gas stations and convenience stores have them. And you can get those for 30 days, provided that it doesn't get too dry. They can be canceled if it becomes unsafe, but you can get those for 30 days. If you're in the city limits, you have that option of removal, and that's what you're supposed to do there. This website here is the Fire Weather Intelligence Portal. In the interest of time, I won't pull it up right now, but the big things with weather are wind, like we talked about, and the relative humidity, because that influences how those fine fuels, if they're dry or not, is kind of the humidity. They can change just from that. So check in ahead of time, see whether you're burning or you just notice it's getting drier, and that's what we check every morning. So you can call us and ask if it's a good day to burn, but keep in mind that it's not just you. Other people are going to burn, whether it's a good day or not. So have to make a plug about the burning. Again, it's this idea of defensible space. This is great. That forest, it looks a little ugly right now, but that stuff's gonna come back like crazy. It's
Was that a plan to burn, or is that?
No,
residual?
this was, what I mentioned before, that burnout operation. So whoever was on this fire would have started to kind of dig a little line, or in this case, you got green grass, so that's not gonna burn. And they would have burned off all around here and then moved on.
Are you available to come to a whole subdivision and give this presentation?
The question was, am I available to give this presentation to a community or a subdivision? The answer is yes. Again, there's one of me for the whole county, and sometimes I do have Tony here, but he's got his own business in the summer. So definitely, I've got some cards with me, and I'll leave them. But get in touch with me. I'll be happy to give these presentations. And then again, hard to see, but there are resources in that Firewise website. It's got a lot of really great information that unfortunately don't have a whole lot of time to go over today, but it's got a list of some species and how they rate as far as flammability. This one is some extreme plants, and not all of them are really common or even commonly planted in our area, but there's definitely quite a few that are relevant on there, and there's extreme, medium, and low, I think, are the three categories. And that's all I've got as far as slides. Again, just kind of ending with this, just can't stress enough that, we've got really, really great resources and great personnel in the county, but when it gets to a fire season like 2016, there's stuff that pops up that you never even hear about. There was Party Rock, which was the big media fire, but at the same time, there was a 250-acre fire in Buncombe County that no one talked about, no one really knew about, because the media was all at this other one. So they pop up, and when they do, there's a lot of them. Appreciate everything, and we'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions. I saw your hand first, sir.
Do you recommend metal roofs?
Metal roofs, it'll depend on the roof. That there are better materials than metal, and I've got some great resources on some of that. Some of the metal, the thinner metal can melt, and that'll happen with siding and things too.
Would you recommend a couple of websites for further info?
So let me double check and make sure. Pretty sure it's just firewise.org. I've got a briefcase of material.
Yes, it is, Chad.
Okay. Firewise.org is a great one. University of Florida Extension has a lot of great information. NC State Extension. NC State, do that one first, or Steve's not going to like me anymore.
Staten Road on your way into DuPont, like from Holmes up there. I think it's miscanthus. It's one of those grasses.
Right.
It is just taking over, and there are homes back in there. Is there some entity that's responsible for clearing that,
For clearing it, no.
killing it, or whatever?
I wish there was.
It was planned by DOT.
A lot of that was used for, a lot of invasives were used for erosion control on different banks. And once they get established, it could have been planted there, and then someone drove by, it blew onto the car next to them, and that spread the seed out. That's the problem with invasives, is how prolifically they grow. So that whole area of the county, it's even back, the other way. Jeter Mountain's got a bunch of it. It's all over there.
You may be able to speak to this, I can't remember the website, but I live kind of close in eastern Henderson County when the Party Rock fire was going on. So there was a website where I could go and get daily updates twice a day on the progress of wildfires, and you can probably, I don't remember what the website, I think it was a USGS site that provided that information.
Right, I can't think of that site off the top of my head. The North Carolina Forest Service does keep track of those on our website as well. I can look at that for you though, and after I can get back with you.
It was a really good resource because it would tell you many crews are involved and a lot of information about the wildfire.
If anyone didn't hear that, she was, they're mentioning a website where you can track the wildfires that are going on, and that, I know the one that we're talking about, but I can't think of it off the top of my head, but the Forest Service does track the fires going on in our area.
I'll put in a plug for a local author, Rose Cindy, who wrote a book, it's a novel, it's based on the Party Rock fire, called Catching Fire. And she interviewed loads and loads of the people involved in fighting the fire. And a lot of the things that you're talking about, she talks about in this novel, as far as how they fought the fire and what, you know, is important to consider in making your home fire, you know, fire lines and all that. It's a very good book, and they do have it at the public library, because that's where I got it.
Okay, you said that was called Catching Fire?
Catching Fire, Rose Senehi, Senehi.
So there you go, if you're interested in kind of learning more of the nitty gritty of that.
Yeah, there's a little token love for you.
Of course.
And I have a question too. So if a homeowner has some acreage and is interested in a prescribed burn, is that something that is available?
It's possible. It depends largely on the specific tract of land. Right now, with prescribed fire not being completely accepted and comfortable in the public eye, we tend to go for the tracts that lend themselves best to it. So, you know, when we set fire, we need to make sure that we have a line around it ahead of time. So if it has roads in place or even old logging roads or anything around it, that's helpful. If it's really steep, it's less likely. If it's on a north-facing slope, it's less likely, just because you have to wait for it to be so much drier to try and burn that. But it is, you know, I've got 3 burns that I'm trying to pull off this spring here in the county, and that's all private landowners. And there's one public lands one.
So just get in touch with your office then.
Get in touch with me. Like I said, I'll have a few cards, and yeah, that's all services that we provide, and we can go over the different options that may be available.
It's usgs.gov under tools and data, if you want to know that mapping they do.
USGS.gov. Other questions?
Where can I learn more about the requirements and conditions of a controlled burn, or a burn permit, sorry?
A burn permit, that's on our website, ncforestservice.gov. You can just do it all online that way, or we can talk afterwards. I should have a permit book in my truck that we can kind of look at if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Now, it pertains to just the county, or you said there was different conditions for Hendersonville or the city or whatever?
Right, so in city limits, you can't burn, you have to have it hauled off because that's available for you. But outside of that, you can burn. There's different parameters that are outlined on the burn permit for the times and, you know, how far away from woodland and things like that.
Right. Good.
If you're surrounded by woods and blow the leaves away because of the leaves, I mean, literally, like sometimes I'll just blow them out into the forest because you can't compost that much.
Right.
Is that recommended or is that not?
I think it's fine depending on what they sort of lay like once you blow them into the woods and how far that is from your house. If the woods come up to here and you just have a whole pile of leaves there that you blew them, that's not good. But you know, if the woods are to the back of this room and you blow the leaves out into there, as long as you kind of don't, how would I put it, don't stop right at the edge of the woods, kind of blow them so that they lay and don't lay in a big pile there. Like you said, you're not going to get the leaves out of the woods, so putting them in there is not a big deal as long as they're kind of spread out. Other questions, comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for staying.